Most theories on building habits focus on the power of the human mind, but at Stanford's Behavior Lab, researchers began looking at the problem through a different lens, analyzing the mechanics of action rather than the strength of a person's resolve. Most of us want to make some kind of positive change, eat healthier, exercise more, finally get enough sleep. And when we inevitably fail to stick to those goals, the immediate reflex is to blame ourselves. Fogg's work identifies failed habits as design flaws. Success depends on the system used to create change, rather than the character of the person attempting it. Relying on motivation to drive your actions is mathematically doomed. Motivation is an emotion. It fluctuates wildly based on stress, sleep, and mood, making it an incredibly unreliable engine for consistency. This research shifts the focus away from a person's character. Instead, it reframes every action as an engineering problem waiting for a design fix.
This graphic defines the universal equation that drives every single action you take, from making the bed to scrolling your phone at 3 a.m. Behavior equals motivation, ability, and prompt. Behavior happens only when these three strict variables converge at the exact same moment. You need the motivation, or desire to act, the ability, or capacity to do it, and a prompt, the cue that triggers the action. If we plot this on a graph, we get an action line. Motivation and ability act as teammates that compensate for one another. If a task is incredibly difficult, like a mother lifting a car off a trapped child, it requires an extreme spike in motivation to pull off. Conversely, when an action is effortless, like swiping a phone notification, it requires almost zero motivation to complete. But neither of those variables matter without the prompt. Without a direct trigger to initiate the action, nothing happens. There's no magic to it. If the combination of your motivation and ability puts you above that curved line when a prompt occurs, the behavior happens. If it falls below, it fails. To see this convergence happen on a massive scale, we can look at the immediate aftermath of the devastating 2010 earthquake in Haiti. The public was highly motivated. The footage of the disaster was well publicized and genuinely heart-wrenching, creating a sudden, massive desire to help the victims. But desire isn't enough. The Red Cross maximized the public's ability to act by making the process utterly frictionless. They didn't ask people to mail a check or call in a credit card number. They simply asked for a text message. Finally, the prompt was delivered directly into people's hands. Millions of people received a text message while they were already holding their phones, precisely when their ability to reply was at its absolute highest. This alignment of variables raised over $21 million in days. It proves that the scale of a result depends on the removal of friction rather than a demand for more effort. This exact same machinery operates in our personal lives. Take a highly capable executive named Katie, who possesses both an excellent daily routine and a frustrating one. This chart plots Katie's desk tidying habit. Her motivation is moderate, but because the task takes less than 3 minutes, her ability is very high. The dot sits safely above the action line. Now look at her scrolling habit. Her 4:30 a.m. alarm prompts her to grab the device. With the phone in hand, ability is extremely high, and the app maximizes motivation. Emotionally, these acts feel worlds apart. Tidying brings pride, while scrolling brings deep guilt. Yet behaviorally, these actions are the same. They are both just bicycles running on the exact same mechanical parts: motivation, ability, and prompt, completely devoid of morality. If a bad habit is a design flaw, the solution to Katie's morning problem is to re-engineer the user experience of her bedroom. When troubleshooting a behavior, Fogg relies on a strict hierarchy: prompt, ability, and motivation. You never start by trying to change motivation, because you usually can't. Katie started by targeting the prompt. Since her smartphone alarm was the trigger, she removed it entirely, replacing it with an old-fashioned mechanical alarm clock. Next, she attacked ability. She physically relocated her smartphone to the kitchen overnight. To scroll in bed, she would now have to get up, walk across the house, and retrieve the phone, adding extreme physical friction to the act. The bad habit died instantly. By treating her environment like a design problem, she achieved total victory without using a single ounce of willpower. We know how to deconstruct the machinery to stop a bad habit. But engineering entirely new routines requires a different application of the formula. Our cultural instinct is to set massive goals. But as the math shows, motivation will eventually betray you. Relying on it to power massive ambitions usually guarantees failure. Building a habit that actually sticks requires bypassing motivation and focusing almost exclusively on ability. We don't go big, we go tiny. When Sandra and Adrian bought their first home, they felt an enormous rush of excitement. They immediately grabbed their tool belts and tore into the interior, sanding, scrubbing, and painting until every square inch was done. But a couple of weeks later, they stepped out onto their back deck to look at the yard. They saw crumbling rocks, knee-high weeds, and a rotting compost pile. In that moment, all their previous drive vanished. They had no idea where to start, and the project suddenly felt impossible. This chart illustrates the motivation wave, a temporary emotional surge that lets you accomplish difficult tasks exactly once. But high motivation is unsustainable. The wave crashes. Relying on it for long-term projects leaves you stranded when the emotion fades. You can see this pattern at an industrial scale with Weight Watchers global signups. Millions ride a motivation wave in January for New Year's, and again in September after summer vacation. But by November and December, that drive completely vanishes. Building a system for self-improvement on top of a temporary emotional surge guarantees failure. The fuel simply runs out. Because we misunderstand how human drive actually works, we waste a tremendous amount of energy trying to artificially manufacture it. We dangle rewards, create elaborate incentive structures, or trap ourselves in guilt trips, hoping to force a feeling that cannot be forced. This chart shows how rapidly natural motivation fluctuates based entirely on timing. On December 24th, your drive to buy a Santa hat might be incredibly high. Just 48 hours later, on December 26th, that exact same drive drops to zero. Retailers know this. They design physical environments to capitalize on these incredibly brief, context-driven spikes in your emotion before they disappear. Motivation is like a flaky party friend. It is great for a wild night out, but it is completely useless when you need a ride to the airport at 5 a.m. It is too unreliable to serve as the foundation for lasting behavioral change. The second major mistake we make is directing whatever motivation we do have toward abstract aspirations. We tell ourselves we want to reduce stress or save money, broad concepts that sound good but offer zero mechanical steps. Public health campaigns fall into this trap all the time. A colorful poster urging you to eat the rainbow might make you feel momentarily inspired. But when you walk into a grocery store, what does that actually mean? It doesn't tell you exactly what to put in your cart. There is a strict mechanical difference between an outcome and a behavior. Saving $500 is an outcome. You cannot sit down and instantly execute it. But calling the cable company to downgrade your service is a specific, immediate behavior. You can pick up the phone and do it right now. Investing your energy into a broad abstraction without identifying a specific, immediate action will leave you paralyzed. Even when people do pick specific habits, they usually select them through haphazard guessing or random bursts of internet inspiration. A person stuck in traffic sees a cyclist whiz by and decides on a whim to become a bike commuter. They spend hundreds of dollars on gear. The next morning, they step outside, feel the cold rain, realize they don't have waterproof pants, and immediately walk to the bus stop. Or someone watches a video of a Zen master and attempts a 30-minute daily meditation routine. They fight their own racing mind for 3 days, get exhausted, and quit. Or they blindly copy a friend's punishing 4:30 a.m. wake-up routine, only to find themselves chronically sleep-deprived and miserable by Thursday. Copying a behavior simply because it sounds impressive, without a systematic method to assess how it fits your actual life, is a gamble, and it almost always results in failure. To bypass the trap of motivation and random guessing, you have to approach habits like an engineer. You need a structured system called behavior design. This diagram shows the first step, the swarm of behaviors. Place your abstract goal in the center, surrounded by highly specific actions. During brainstorming, don't judge practicality. Write down wild ideas. You could get a massage, stretch after calls, or move to Maui. Visualizing multiple paths to a single goal destroys the myth that there is only one right way to change your life. Once you have your swarm of ideas, you run them through an analytical filtration system. This grid is called the focus map. In round 1, you sort your behaviors vertically based entirely on their impact. How effective is this action at achieving your goal? If your goal is reducing stress, playing the guitar for 10 minutes every day is highly effective, so it goes near the top. Leaving work 15 minutes early might sound nice, but if it causes you to stress over missed deadlines, its impact is low. That slides to the bottom. In round 2, you look at the horizontal axis on this chart. You slide the behaviors side to side based on feasibility. You ask yourself one brutal, honest question. Can I actually get myself to do this? This is the core rule of behavior design. You must match yourself with behaviors you actually want to do, like eating ice cream, not what you think you should do. By focusing entirely on ease, you remove the friction of forced willpower from the equation. This highlighted area in the upper right quadrant reveals the outcome of the map. These are your golden behaviors. Because they sit in this specific corner, they require zero forced motivation. They are both highly effective at solving your problem and incredibly easy for you to execute in your daily life. For example, if you want better sleep, you don't force an exhausted version of yourself to stick to a rigid 9 p.m. bedtime. Instead, you perform a one-time golden behavior. You hire someone to install blackout shades. Your daily habit becomes something effortless, like spending 2 seconds putting your phone on silent mode, instead of attempting a complex 45-minute evening meditation ritual. Lasting habits aren't built by fighting your own nature on your best days.
You've successfully shrunk a new habit down so it's incredibly easy to execute. The motivation is there, the ability is there, but there is a massive catch. You still have to remember to actually do it. This illustration represents a person prompt. It means relying on internal memory or bodily urges to trigger an action. Biologically, urges like hunger work reliably. But if survival doesn't depend on the behavior, internal memory is often the first thing to fail. Look at this second diagram, which shows a context prompt. This represents environmental cues trying to solve that memory gap from the outside. It's the sticky note on your mirror, the alarm on your phone, or the red notification badge on an app. Modern environments rely heavily on context prompts, leading to significant sensory pollution. When we are bombarded with constant pings and visual alerts, we develop notification fatigue. Eventually, the noise blends into the background, and we look right past the very reminders we set for ourselves. Internal memory is faulty, and external reminders are easily ignored once the noise becomes constant. Without a different approach to prompting, new habits are unlikely to take hold. We have to stop adding new noise to our environment. Instead, we can tap into the routines that are already humming along on autopilot. This image illustrates the action prompt. This method leverages an existing automatic routine you already do every single day, like brushing your teeth or starting the coffee maker, and uses it as the cue for your new habit. This flowchart shows how human behaviors naturally happen in a sequence. We operate similarly to computer code, where one specific action reliably triggers the next step in a program. Looking at this diagram, we see the syntax required to write the sequence into your life. It's an if-then statement. After I execute my existing routine, I will perform my new tiny behavior. You are attaching the new action to a stable foundation. Stanford researcher BJ Fogg used this logic to build a push-up habit into his morning. He needed an anchor that happened reliably every day, so he chose a basic bathroom routine. His code was simple. After he flushed the toilet, he would immediately do 2 push-ups. That existing routine served as the trigger for the new behavior. Using action prompts bypasses the need for memory or alarms. It turns the basic structure of your day into a reliable trigger system. Action prompts only work when the new habit and the existing routine align across specific variables. To make them snap together, you must match the physical location, the frequency, and the thematic purpose of both actions. If you want to wipe down the kitchen counter once a day, you must attach it to an anchor that already happens once a day, inside the kitchen. Consider the case of Amy, a freelance writer facing a difficult divorce. She needed to increase her business income to secure legal representation, but her anxiety over the future made it difficult to focus on her daily work. She decided to start with a tiny habit, writing down her single most important task for the day on a Post-it note. To ensure the habit stuck, she identified a specific anchor in her morning. Every day, she drove her kids to school. Her action prompt became the moment she shut her car door after the drop-off. Car door shuts, she parks the car, and she writes the note.
Over the next 6 months, Amy quadrupled her income. This momentum grew from planting a tiny behavior into the specific physical location where her workday naturally began. Anchors often fail because the prompt is too broad. Phrases like after breakfast or after I get home from work involve too many different actions to provide a clear signal to start a new habit. Successful design requires identifying the trailing edge. This is the exact terminal point of an existing behavior. A woman named Elena tried anchoring a counter-wiping habit to putting breakfast dishes in the sink, but the habit wouldn't stick. She fixed it by focusing on the trailing edge, the exact sensory moment of shutting off the water. That specific sound and feel became the trigger that finally locked the habit into place. This level of detail allows for the creation of pearl habits, where you repurpose unavoidable irritants. A clicking air conditioning unit can become the prompt to relax your neck muscles. An insult from an angry ex-spouse can become the prompt to practice a self-care routine. Mastering the trailing edge allows you to turn daily friction into a catalyst for automatic growth. Even with a perfectly engineered sequence, there is a common misunderstanding about how these behaviors actually become permanent. Repetition alone does not create habits. Performing an action dozens of times does not guarantee the brain will continue to do it automatically. Repetition lacks the biological signal required for encoding. For a behavior to physically wire into the brain, it must be followed by an immediate positive emotion. This emotional payload signals the reward circuitry to recognize and store the preceding sequence. This means you must deliberately manufacture a feeling of celebration in the split second you complete your tiny habit. That immediate spike of emotion is what allows the reward circuitry to lock the habit in. This internal feeling of success, a sensation called shine, functions as the signal that encodes the new behavior into your long-term memory. At 26, Sukumar noticed he was growing a paunch. For the next 17 years, he tried and failed to lose it through a cycle of crash diets and ambitious workouts. His eventual breakthrough didn't start with a massive lifestyle overhaul. It started with him doing exactly 2 push-ups right after brushing his teeth. This diagram illustrates the first way that habits scale. They grow. Just like a delicate plant rooting in a garden, Sukumar's 2 daily push-ups steadily expanded. 2 became 10, then 20, eventually stabilizing at a routine of 50 push-ups and a 5-minute plank. This subsequent diagram shows the second scaling mechanism, multiplication. A single specific action acts like a seed carried by the wind, propagating completely new, related behaviors. Sukumar's push-ups created ripple effects that led to daily strength training and stretching. The compound effect of these scaling habits completely eliminated his back pain. Over time, 20 pounds and 5 inches vanished from his waist. We often assume that drastic physical changes require agonizing upfront effort. The reality is that lasting transformation relies on planting trainee behavioral inputs and letting them scale naturally without friction. The psychological engine driving this frictionless scaling is a dynamic called success momentum. It dictates whether you actually perform a behavior in the exact moment you are prompted to do it. This chart maps out internal motivation as a battle of opposing vectors. Part of you wants to act, driven by the hope of good outcomes, but another part is fearful of failure or social pressure. When the downward vector of fear overpowers hope, your motivation stays pinned below the action line, and the behavior fails. This updated graph demonstrates what happens when you rack up frequent, tiny successes. The anxiety and fear surrounding the behavior evaporate. With that downward pressure removed, the natural motivator of hope surges, pushing your overall motivation safely above the action line. Once you are permanently operating above that threshold, your confidence compounds. You can easily start adopting harder, more complex habits because you now have the motivational surplus to support them. The mathematical driver of this process is not the size of your victories, it is the sheer frequency of them. A high volume of small wins eliminates fear and puts habit scaling on autopilot. Meanwhile, on a work trip in West Africa, a woman named Junie was out at 7 a.m. hunting for breakfast. She wasn't looking for local cuisine, she was looking for ice cream. For Junie, the early morning ice cream was followed by a double caramel macchiato at lunch and bags of onion-flavored corn snacks during commercial breaks. This daily intake of sugar and processed food was a complex routine holding her health hostage. If crossing the action line allows us to scale positive habits effortlessly, the obvious question is how we can reverse engineer that exact same mathematical threshold to dismantle negative ones. Standard advice treats a bad habit like a brittle object shattered by willpower, but aggressively applying force backfires, creating tension that reinforces the behavior. Unwanted behaviors are tangled knots. You cannot untangle a knot by yanking on both ends. You have to pick it apart, deliberately, step by step. To systematically pick those knots apart, we use a framework called the Behavior Change Master Plan. This graphic shows an empty cloud representing a broad, abstract category like eating too much junk food. If you try to attack this massive, poorly defined concept all at once, the sheer scale of the problem causes intimidation and immediate failure. Instead, this diagram maps a swarm of behaviors. Junie broke her sugar addiction down into specific actions: buying a morning donut or snacking on office candy. Isolating micro-behaviors lets you survey the swarm and resolve the easiest target first, like bypassing the gas station breakfast. Defeating a massive, entrenched routine requires stripping it of its power, isolating its smallest components, and eliminating them one at a time. The most efficient tactical strike you can make against one of these micro-behaviors is to target its environmental trigger. By removing the prompt, you force the behavior instantly below the action line. The first method is to remove the prompt entirely by redesigning your physical space. If you want to stop eating junk food, you ensure there is absolutely no junk food in your pantry. If you can't remove the prompt, you avoid it. If a specific coffee shop always tempts you with sugary pastries, you physically change your morning commute to bypass that street. The final option is to simply ignore the prompt, but this is a dangerous trap. Ignoring a trigger requires active willpower, and relying on willpower when you are stressed or anxious is a mathematical guarantee of eventual failure. Successfully removing or avoiding a trigger permanently deletes the behavior from your life, requiring zero conscious discipline on your part. This graph plots out the next step. If you absolutely cannot remove or avoid a prompt, your only remaining option is to artificially inject friction into the process, forcing the habit horizontally from easy to hard. This illustration breaks ability down into a 5-link chain: time, money, physical effort, mental effort, and routine. Intentionally increasing the required effort puts stress on the behavior. If you make a habit sufficiently taxing to perform, that specific link snaps and its viability collapses. By systematically dismantling prompts and snapping ability chains, Junie completely neutralized her sugar addiction. Using the exact same underlying logic, Sukumar reversed 17 years of weight gain and built a permanent fitness routine. Human behavior is a strict design problem. Lasting transformation occurs only when we stop relying on the flawed concept of willpower and start engineering our systems.
21-year-old Chris lived at home, struggling to manage the basic demands of adulthood. The tension in the house was suffocating. Every time his father Mike asked Chris to clean up, it triggered a predictable cycle of ignored requests, escalating nagging, and angry outbursts. Mike's strategy, relentless nagging, relied on a flawed assumption. He believed if he demanded compliance loudly enough, he could eventually force his son to care. This graph of behavioral mechanics illustrates why that fails. Pushing someone to act relies entirely on unreliable motivation. When you apply external pressure to force a behavior, psychological resistance naturally pushes back, often snapping the person further away from their target. To bypass this resistance, behavioral scientist BJ Fogg outlines 2 distinct approaches to group change. You can act as the ringleader, rallying them toward a shared goal, or operate completely under the radar. Fogg calls this stealth approach the ninja. Instead of demanding that someone generate their own motivation, you quietly manipulate their environment to lower the barrier to action. Chronic friction in a household or workplace rarely stems from a lack of affection. It usually comes from a futile attempt to force motivation, rather than taking the time to design a simpler physical path forward. Mike tested this stealth architecture on a daily source of conflict: Chris constantly leaving used grounds in Mike's expensive coffee maker. Instead of demanding that Chris clean the entire machine, Mike erased the friction. He casually asked Chris to execute one simple step: just take the filter out and set it on the counter. The next morning, the filter was on the counter.
By dropping the physical and mental demands of the task to mere zero, Chris complied effortlessly. The second phase of the stealth approach requires delivering positive reinforcement at the exact moment it creates the highest psychological impact. This Venn diagram maps the feedback power zone, the psychological intersection where praise wires a new habit. The thanks hit a domain Chris cared about, respect, but where he felt highly uncertain. This vulnerability made the feedback potent, triggering a dopamine release called shine. This chemical reward loop quickly scaled. Within a couple of weeks, Chris began rinsing the filter and replacing it entirely on his own. By simply facilitating the environment, the need to nag was eradicated. This stealth architecture scales far beyond a suburban kitchen. Fogg's team deployed the exact same methodology to tackle severe burnout among nurses in a high-stress hospital ward. Traditional corporate interventions fail in these environments. You cannot mandate an exhausted, overwhelmed medical professional to simply manage their stress or enforce a mandatory relaxation break. Instead, the team designed an environment of stealth intervention using action prompts. They linked microscopic restorative behaviors to the existing, unavoidable routines of a 12-hour hospital shift. This matching system acts like a behavioral slot machine. Nurses locked a restorative action onto an existing anchor. The act of parking a car prompted 3 deep breaths, and docking a medical computer became the trigger to take a single sip of water. As the nurses experienced the immediate success of these tiny actions, the behavior multiplied. They organically began clapping for each other in the break room and celebrating their colleagues' micro-wins on the ward. Systemic cultural shifts never take root through top-down mandates or guilt. Change spreads like a contagion only when a network begins to share genuine feelings of success. In 2016, BJ Fogg had a vivid dream of being trapped on a crashing airplane. As the cabin shook, he expected to feel panic. Instead, he felt a crushing sense of regret. He realized that if he died, his insights on how people actually adopt new behaviors would remain locked in academic journals, totally inaccessible to the people who needed them most. This anxiety had a real origin. A few years prior, Fogg received a short text message. His 20-year-old nephew, Garrett, died from an overdose. Fogg was in Amsterdam. The news launched him on a midnight sprint through Schiphol Airport to catch a flight home to his grieving sister. Days later, sitting next to Linda as she sobbed on her side patio, Fogg made a quiet decision. He would use every behavioral tool he had spent his career developing to help his sister navigate the suffocating gravity of her loss. In that moment, the science of behavior design shifted from a clinical academic exercise to a survival mechanism for navigating a period of unimaginable suffering. The ultimate result of this framework happened on that side patio. Linda used these tiny habits to survive her immediate grief, and over time, she transitioned into a behavioral coach herself, guiding thousands of others through their own crises. To bypass the human instinct for fear, shame, and resistance, the starting point must be kept intentionally, almost trivially small. One successful shift rewires a single routine. That consistency eventually alters a family dynamic, and that shift can disrupt the culture of an entire community. We often focus on massive overhauls, but the data suggests that large-scale shifts are the cumulative result of these small, repeated successes. When the barrier to entry is lowered, a behavior has the best chance of becoming a permanent part of the environment.